The research vessel Serenity's light had been humanity's worst nightmare come true. If humanity had known it existed, drifting through the Kepler asteroid belt like a wounded animal, the ship's bioluminescent hull pulsed weakly against the cosmic darkness. Each flicker grew dimmer, like a heartbeat slowly fading into silence. Captain Thelanara's crystalline fingers trembled as she reached for the emergency transmitter. Her species, the gentle Velani, had explored the galaxy for 3,000 years without ever encountering true violence. They were researchers, philosophers, healers beings, who viewed the universe as one vast library waiting to be read. Violence was as foreign to them as breathing underwater would be to humans. But today, violence had found them. "Hull breach on. Decks 4 through 7, her science officer whispered, his usual melodic voice cracking with terror. "Life support failing. We have maybe 6 hours of breathable atmosphere left." Thelanara closed her 4 eyes, fighting back panic. The pirate attack had come from nowhere, brutal, efficient, designed not to capture, but to cripple. They'd taken what they wanted from the ship's research databases and left the crew to die slowly in the void. It was, she realized with growing horror, entertainment for them. Her hand found the emergency beacon. Protocol demanded she broadcast on all frequencies, hoping some civilized species might hear their plea. The Galactic Harmony Council maintained rescue protocols across most of known space. Surely someone would come. "This is research vessel Serenity's light to any listening civilization." She gasped into the transmitter, her translator struggling to maintain coherence through her panic. "We are peaceful explorers from the Velani Collective. Our engines are dead. Life support systems failing. We have 23 crew members aboard, including younglings. Please ... Anyone who receives this message, we need immediate assistance." Signal burst outward at faster-than-light speeds, carrying with it the desperation of a dying crew. It raced past empty solar systems, through nebula clouds that had witnessed the birth and death of civilizations, beyond the patrol routes of known rescue services, and then, 37 light-years away, it reached a small blue-green world orbiting. An unremarkable yellow star, a world that most galactic civilizations spoke of only in whispers. A world marked in every stellar database with a single terrifying designation: "Quarantine, do not approach Darth." The signal hit Terra commands. Deep space monitoring stations at 0347 hours, Terran Standard Time. Within seconds, automated systems had analyzed the transmission, identified it as a genuine distress call, and routed it directly to the Situation Room where Admiral Jake Morrison was reviewing fleet deployments. Morrison had been awake for 36 hours straight, not unusual for someone who'd earned his rank fighting in the Proxima Wars. His face bore the scars of those conflicts. A plasma burn along his left cheek, eyes that had seen too much death, and the kind of weariness that came from carrying the weight of human survival on his shoulders. But when that alien distress call crackled through the speakers, something changed in his expression, something dangerous. "Sir," Colonel Emma Watson's voice cut through the tension, her fingers dancing across holographic displays that showed real-time galactic monitoring data. "We're receiving what appears to be a distress call from an unknown species. Signal originated from Grid Sector 7 Alpha 9, approximately 37 light-years from Earth." Morrison stood slowly, his 6'4" frame casting shadows across the war room's tactical displays. Round him, his staff, the best and brightest of humanity's military elite, watched their commander with growing anticipation. They'd seen that look before. It usually preceded something spectacular and terrifying. "Play it again," Morrison commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never learned to accept defeat. The alien's desperate plea filled the room once more. Even through the universal translator, the terror was unmistakable. Here was a being facing death, calling out into the darkness, and hoping anyone might care enough to help. "Analysis," Watson Morrison said, his jaw tightening with each word of the alien's message. "Long-range sensors confirm a vessel in distress at the specified coordinates. No life signs detectable at this distance, but that could be due to interference. From the local asteroid field, the ship appears to be drifting, No engine signatures detected. Morrison's scarred hands clenched into fists. Survivors.
Unknown, sir.
But based on the transmission timestamp and typical life support failure rates, Watson paused, running calculations through her neural interface.
Ash.
If there are survivors, they don't have long. The room fell silent except for the hum of advanced technology and the distant vibration of Terra Command's massive defensive shields. Everyone present understood the implications. An unknown alien species was dying in the void, and they were the only ones who'd heard their cry for help. But here's what made the situation truly terrifying for anyone who might be listening. These weren't just any humans responding to the call. This was Admiral Jake Morrison, the man who'd turned the tide at Proxima Centauri by ramming his flagship directly into an enemy dreadnought. This was Colonel Emma Watson, who'd earned the nickname Iron Emma after holding a defensive position for 6 days against impossible odds. These were the humans who'd looked at a galaxy full of older, more advanced civilizations and decided they didn't care about the odds. How long to intercept with our fastest ships? Morrison asked, already knowing he'd made his decision. Days with the new quantum-fold drives, sir. But that's assuming we launch immediately and push the engines past recommended safety limits. Morrison's smile was sharp enough to cut Diamond. We push them past safety limits. Deploy the 7th Fleet. Full battle configuration. Sir Commander Noah Williams spoke up from his position at the tactical console. We don't know anything. About this species, they could be hostile. This could be a trap. Morrison turned to face his staff, and for a moment, they saw not just their commanding officer, but the living embodiment of human stubbornness, human refusal to abandon those in need, human willingness to charge into the unknown because it was the right thing to do. Commander, in my 30 years of military service, I've learned one simple truth. When someone calls for help, you answer. Period. Everything else is just details we figure out along the way. He paused, letting his words sink in. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? We're already the most feared species in known space. Might as well earn the reputation. What Captain Thelanara and her dying crew didn't know, what no one in the galaxy truly understood, was that they'd just made contact with a species that had evolved under one simple, brutal rule. Protect your own, no matter the cost. And as of 4 minutes and 37 seconds ago, humanity had just adopted 23 alien researchers as their own. The galaxy was about to learn why Earth remained quarantined, and why even pirates woke up screaming from nightmares about angry humans. 3 days had crawled by like dying centuries aboard the Serenity's light. Captain Thelanara watched her crew slowly succumb to oxygen deprivation, their crystalline skin taking on the gray pallor that marked the approach of death. The youngest of their research team, barely past his first century of life, had fallen unconscious 2 hours ago. His breathing came in shallow, desperate gasps. She'd stopped believing anyone would come. That's when the universe exploded around them. The ship's proximity alarms shrieked like banshees as Thelanara's tactical displays lit up with warnings that defied belief. Massive energy signatures were tearing holes in the fabric of space itself, emerging from hyperspace with the violence of newborn stars. One signature, then 5, then 20, then so many that her ancient sensors simply gave up. Counting and displayed a single terrifying message. Fleet detected scale unknown. Captain, her science officer whispered, his voice barely audible over the screaming alarms. Something's coming out of hyperspace. Something ... massive. Thelanara's 4 hands trembled as she tried to focus the ship's failing sensors on the approaching signatures, which she saw would haunt her dreams for the rest of her very long life. Ships. Warships. Not the elegant, curved vessels of civilized species that glided through space like poetry in motion. These were angular predators, all sharp edges and aggressive geometry. Built not to explore or trade, but to kill with maximum efficiency. Each one bristled with weapon systems that looked capable of cracking small moons. Their hulls bore the scars of countless battles, blast marks, hastily repaired armor plating. It's the kind of where that came from, fighting wars across the galaxy. By the sacred crystals, her science officer breathed. His usual scientific composure completely shattered. What are those monsters? But Thelanara couldn't answer. She was too busy staring at the lead vessel, a dreadnought that defied every convention of civilized starship design. The thing stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern. Its hull a patchwork of battle damage and repair work that spoke of a species that viewed warfare as a natural state of existence. Weapon ports glowed along its flanks like the eyes of some deep space predator, and its engines burned with the fury of controlled fusion reactions. The ship's name was etched into its hull in letters that seemed to radiate menace, retribution's edge. "Are they here to rescue us?" asked her communications officer. Hope and terror warring in her melodic voice. Thelanara studied the tactical display and felt her hope curdle into liquid fear. These weren't rescue ships. These were instruments of war designed by a species that had clearly mastered the art of organized violence on a scale that made her mind reel. The smallest escort vessel in the approaching fleet could probably reduce her home planet's capital city to glowing crater in minutes. "I don't think rescue is what they have in mind," she whispered. Then the communications array crackled to life, and a face appeared on their main viewing screen that would be burned into Thelanara's memory for the rest of her existence. The being was clearly an apex predator. That much was obvious from its bone structure alone, angular features that spoke of evolutionary efficiency, forward-facing eyes that marked it as a hunter rather than prey, and facial muscles that seemed designed for expressions of controlled aggression. But it was the intelligence behind those eyes that truly terrified her. This wasn't some mindless beast. This was a thinking, planning, strategizing predator with access to technology that could reshape star systems. When it spoke, its voice carried the kind of absolute authority that came from commanding others through their darkest moments and bringing them out alive. "This is Admiral Morrison of the Terran Navy. We received your distress call. Stand by for emergency boarding." Terran? The word hit Thelanara like a physical blow. She'd heard whispers of Terra, fragments of rumors passed between star traders, who claimed to have encountered evidence of this mysterious species. Deathworlders, they called them. Beings who had evolved on a planet so hostile that merely surviving to adulthood marked them as the most dangerous life forms in known space. But surely those were just stories. Legends meant to frighten younglings. No species could actually be that violent and still achieve spacefell. Could they? Her question was answered when she watched the human fleet deploy for what they clearly considered a rescue operation. Sleek. Attack craft launched from the warship's fighter bays. Not the gentle rescue shuttles that civilized species use for emergency operations, but military dropships designed for hostile boarding actions. These vessels moved with the predatory grace of sharks, sensing blood in the water, their engines burning bright against the cosmic darkness as they accelerated toward her dying ship. "Captain," her tactical officer's voice cracked with panic. "Those aren't rescue craft. Those are assault vehicles. They're armed with weapons that could cut through our hull like it was made of paper." Thelanara watched the approaching dropships and felt a chill that had nothing to do with their failing. Life support. Each craft bristled with defensive weaponry and sensor arrays that were clearly designed for combat operations. Their hulls bore the same battle scars as the larger ships, telling stories of boarding actions and close quarters, combat that our peaceful species couldn't even imagine. But here's what really terrified her. The humans were deploying these war machines for a rescue operation. This wasn't their military showing off or trying to intimidate anyone. This was apparently how they responded to distress calls. With overwhelming force and the kind of tactical precision that spoke of a species that had turned warfare into an art form. "What kind of beings?" she whispered to herself. "Treat rescue operations like military invasions?" The answer, she was beginning to realize, was the kind of beings that had earned a quarantine zone around their entire home system. The kind of beings that other species spoke of in hushed, terrified whispers. The kind of beings that had somehow turned the simple act of helping strangers into a demonstration of why they were the most feared predators in the galaxy. Her crew huddled together in the ship's central compartment, watching through the viewports As the human dropships approached with mechanical precision, each alien face reflected the same growing terror. They'd called for help, and help was coming. But this help carried enough firepower to sterilize entire star systems. Had they escaped? Death by pirate attack only to face something infinitely worse? Were they about to discover why every galactic database marked Terra with warnings that made grown beings wake up screaming? As the first dropship clamped onto their airlock with a metallic clang that echoed through the dying ship, Thelanara realized they were about to find out exactly what humanity meant by rescue operation. And somehow she suspected that definition was going to be unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen before. The airlock began to cycle, and 23 terrified researchers, prepared to meet their rescuers, their executioners. The airlocks didn't just open, they exploded inward with the kind of mechanical violence that spoke of beings who approached everything. Even rescue operations, like a military assault. Thelanara and her crew pressed themselves against the far bulkhead, expecting armored monsters to storm through those portals with weapons blazing and conquest on their minds. What came through instead would be talked about in hushed whispers across every civilized world for the next 1,000 years. The first human through the breach was a female Lieutenant Olivia James, though the terrified aliens didn't know her name yet. She moved with the fluid precision of a trained killer, her powered armor gleaming under the ship's failing emergency lights. Her weapon, some kind of advanced energy rifle, was held in perfect ready position, finger on the trigger, eyes scanning for threats with the mechanical efficiency of a predator that had never learned to doubt its own lethality. But then she saw the injured Valani researcher collapse near the communications console, its crystalline skin gray with oxygen deprivation. Something extraordinary happened. The weapon disappeared into a magnetic clamp on her armor's back. The predatory alertness melted into something else entirely. And this battle-hardened human soldier, this product of humanity's most advanced military training, dropped to one knee beside a dying alien and became something the galaxy had never seen before, a Deathworlder showing mercy. "Easy there. We're here to help," Olivia said softly, her voice somehow cutting through their terror like warm sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Her medical scanner device, more advanced than anything in Valani databases, was already adapting to the researchers' unique physiology, learning his biology in real time, and calculating treatment protocols that shouldn't have been possible. The young researcher's eyes fluttered open. Instead of the snarling predator he expected to see, he found himself looking into human eyes filled with genuine concern. When Olivia smiled at Haymond, how was it possible for a creature with those sharp canine teeth to make a smile look reassuring? He felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 days of slow dying: hope. "Your blood chemistry is fascinating," Olivia murmured as she worked, her scanner feeding data directly to her neural interface. "Crystalline-based metabolism, silicon-carbon hybrid cellular structure. Don't worry, I'm just trying to figure out how to help you breathe easier." Around the dying ship, more humans poured through the airlocks, and each one shattered another piece of everything the galaxy thought it knew about Deathworlders. These weren't mindless berserkers or savage conquerors. They were something far more terrifying, organized, disciplined, and utterly committed to the impossible task of saving lives that any rational species would have written off as already lost. Sergeant Lucas Martinezal, 6 feet and 6 inches of him, with hands the size of dinner plates and arms that looked capable of bending steel beams, knelt beside the ship's failing life support systems with the delicate touch of a master craftsman. His massive fingers, which could probably crush a Valani skull without effort, worked with surgical precision to jury-rig their bioatmospheric processors using human spare parts. "Your people did beautiful work on these systems," he said too. The ship's engineer, who was staring at him with a mixture of terror and fascination. "Biomechanical integration at this level could learn a lot from your designs. Don't worry, I'm just going to patch this coupling here. Boost your oxygen recycling by about 30%. The engineer watched in amazement as this human giant, this creature who looked like he could punch through armored bulkheads, treated their delicate biosystems with the kind of reverence usually reserved for sacred artifacts. Every movement was calculated, gentle, respectful of technology he was seeing for the first time. But it was Nadek Isabella Rodriguez who truly broke their understanding of what Deathworlders were supposed to be. A force of nature, her medical bag filled with treatments that shouldn't have existed. Her diagnostic equipment adapting to alien physiology in ways that violated everything the galaxy knew about xenobiology. Radiation poisoning from your reactor breach. She murmured to herself as she worked on a Veilani physicist whose crystalline skin had taken on a sickly luminescence. Your species processes ionizing radiation differently than we do, but the cellular damage patterns are similar enough. She pulled out an injector filled with something that glowed with its own inner light. This is experimental nanomedical therapy. We developed it for our own radiation exposure cases. I'm adapting the programming for your physiology on the fly. It might feel strange, but it should start repairing the damage at the cellular level. The physicist felt the medicine flow through his system like liquid starlight, and for the first time in days, the burning pain in his crystalline matrix began to fade. He looked up at this human female, this being whose species was supposedly incapable of true compassion, and saw her face set in an expression of fierce concentration that spoke of someone who took every life as a personal responsibility. Don't understand. Captain Thelanara whispered to Admiral Morrison as emergency lights flickered around them, casting dancing shadows that made the humans look even more alien and terrifying. Your species is legendary across the galaxy for destruction. Every database, every warning, every story we've heard. You're supposed to be monsters. Why are you saving us? Morrison's smile was sharp as a vibroblade, but somehow reassuring, like a predator promising protection instead of death. Because you called for help. And because no innocent dies while humans draw breath not if we can prevent it. But even as he spoke those words, Thelanara saw his expression begin to darken. His neural interface was processing data from her ship's logs, piecing together the attack that had left them dying in the void. The change in his demeanor was subtle, but unmistakable, like watching a dormant volcano remember that it was capable of eruption. Besides, Morrison continued, his voice taking on an edge that made the temperature in the room seem to drop several degrees. Someone attacked a peaceful research vessel. Someone hurt people who were doing nothing more dangerous than trying to understand the universe. His eyes, those forward-facing predator's eyes that marked humans as apex hunters, began to burn with something that made Thelanara's survival. Instincts scream warnings. That makes them our problem now. We have very specific ways of solving problems. The other humans in the compartment had gone very still. Not the stillness of fear, but the stillness of predators who had just caught the scent of prey. Thelanara realized with growing horror that she was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. A species of Deathworlders who rescued the innocent with the same ruthless efficiency they used to destroy their enemies. But here's what really terrified Hearn. What would terrify every pirate, slaver, and predator species when word of this incident spread across the galaxy? The humans weren't done. Saving her crew was just the first part of their response. The second part was going to involve finding whoever had attacked a ship full of peaceful researchers and teaching them why humanity's home system remained quarantined, and somehow suspected that lesson was going to be written in fire across the stars. The medical bay of the Retribution's edge, armed with technology that seemed almost magical to the recovering Veilani survivors. Captain Thelanara lay on a biobed that was actively repairing cellular damage she'd thought was permanent, while around her, human medical officers worked with the kind of focused intensity that suggested they took every patient's recovery as a personal mission. But it was what was happening on the other side of the bay that made her crystalline blood run cold with a mixture of anticipation and terror. Human intelligence officers had connected their quantum computers directly to the Serenity's Light's data cores, and what they were discovering. In those final moments before the attack was transforming their faces into masks of barely controlled rage. These weren't the gentle, caring medics who had saved her crew. These were the other side of humanity, the side that had earned them a quarantine zone around their entire solar system. Commander? Noah Williams stood hunched over a holographic display that showed the attack in horrifying detail. Its massive frame-all, 240 pounds of muscle and military training, was coiled like a spring under tension. As the data streams flowed across his neural interface, Thelanara watched his expression shift from professional analysis to something that made her survival instincts scream warnings. "Pirates," he snarled, his voice carrying the kind of controlled fury that preceded acts of legendary violence. The datapad in his hands, military-grade carbon composite designed to withstand battlefield. Conditions began to crack under the pressure of his grip. Krolex Syndicate. 15 ships, sir. They've been hunting research vessels across 3 sectors like they're some kind of sport. Morrison's expression underwent a transformation that would haunt Thelanara's dreams for centuries to come. The caring protector who had overseen her crew's rescue vanished, replaced by something that looked like it had crawled out of the deepest, darkest nightmares of every predator species in the galaxy. His eyes, those forward-facing hunters' eyes, began to burn with an intensity that seemed to generate its own heat. "Location?" he asked, his voice so quiet that it somehow carried more menace than a shout. Williams's fingers danced across his interface, pulling up tactical data that made the ambient temperature in the medical bay seemed to drop several degrees. "Helix Nebula System, sir. Long-range sensors indicate they're holding position near the gravitational anomaly, probably waiting to see if anyone responds to distress calls. Looks like they're using rescued ships as bait for more victims." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that precedes earthquakes. Every human in the medical bay had gone completely still, not the stillness of fear, but the predatory stillness of apex hunters who had just identified their prey. Thelanara realized she was witnessing something unprecedented. A species of Deathworlders transitioning from rescue mode to what she could only describe as war mode. Morrison turned toward her with movements that were too controlled, too precise, like someone fighting to contain something explosive inside themselves. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority mixed with barely restrained violence. "Captain, I need to ask you something important, and I need you to be completely honest with me." His eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her feel like he could see straight through to her soul. "Your crew members who didn't make it, how many did they murder?" The question hit Thelanara like a physical blow. Her large eyes filled with grief as memories of the attack flooded back, friends and colleagues cut down by weapons fire. Scientists who had dedicated their lives to understanding the universe snuffed out like candles by beings who valued their research more than their lives. 23 of my people," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "They came aboard after crippling our engines, took what they wanted from our databases. Then they... They executed anyone who might have been able to identify them later. They destroyed decades of research that could have helped countless worlds, develop better medicine, cleaner energy, safer space travel." She paused, crystalline tears flowing down her face as she remembered colleagues who would never see their home world again. They laughed while they did it, called us soft targets, and said we were good practice for their new recruits. Morrison's expression became something that belonged in the deepest levels of whatever hell humans believed in. The change was so dramatic that Thelanara actually felt her biobed sensors spike as her fear response triggered. This wasn't just anger. This was fury refined into something almost artistic in its intensity. 23, he repeated, each word falling like a hammer blow. 23 people who dedicated their lives to making the universe a better place. 23 beings who never hurt anyone, never threatened anyone, never wanted anything more than to understand how things worked. Around the medical bay, other humans had begun to move with the kind of purposeful efficiency that suggested they were preparing for something significant. Weapons were being checked, armor systems were powering up, and communication channels were buzzing with the kind of tactical chatter that preceded major military operations. Nodded slowly, his face settling into a mask of deadly calm that was somehow more terrifying than his earlier rage. Then witness what happens when humanity gets angry, really angry. He turned toward the bay's main display, which showed a tactical overview of the surrounding star systems. With a gesture, he highlighted the Helix Nebula and the 15 ships waiting there like spiders in a web. "All ships, this is Admiral Morrison. New mission parameters are now in effect. We are no longer conducting a rescue operation. His voice carried across the fleet's communication channels with the authority of someone who had never learned to accept defeat. We are now conducting a pest control operation. The human fleet began to turn toward the nebula with movements that spoke of predators who had caught the scent of prey. Weapon systems that had been powered down during the rescue began charging with energies that made space itself seem to bend around them. Shield generators hummed to life with the kind of power output that suggested the humans weren't planning to take prisoners. But here's what really terrified Thelanara as she watched this transformation. The humans weren't acting out of blind rage or mindless vengeance. They were approaching this with the same methodical precision they'd used to save her crew. They were treating the annihilation of 15 pirate ships as just another problem to be solved with overwhelming force and tactical brilliance. "Admiral," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of a fleet preparing for war, "what are you going to do to them?" Morrison's smile was sharp enough to cut through armored hull plating. "We're going to teach the galaxy a lesson that's been a long time coming. We're going to show them what happens when someone hurts innocent people within range of human protection." Fleet's engines flared to life with the fury of controlled fusion reactions. And 60 warships began accelerating toward a rendezvous with destiny. As they moved, Thelanara realized she was about to witness something that would become legend. The moment the galaxy learned why Earth's quarantine wasn't meant to keep other species out, it was meant to keep humanity in, until someone made the mistake of hurting innocents, and all bets were off. The Krolex pirate fleet hung in the twisted gravity fields of the Helix Nebula like vultures waiting for carrion. Captain Vextara, 7-foot nightmare of chitin, and predatory. Instinct monitored his sensor displays with the confidence of someone who had turned murder into a profitable business model. Around him, 14 other raider captains maintained their positions in what they called the killing field. A gravitational maze where disabled ships became easy prey. Unknown fleet approaching from Sector 7. His tactical officer reported with the bored tone of someone who had seen this scenario play out dozens of times. 60 ships, military configuration, they're not even trying to hide their approach. Vexter. Mandibles clicked with amusement. 60 ships? These had to be the rescuers responding to that pathetic distress call from the research vessel they'd crippled 3 days ago. Some soft-hearted species come into play here, no doubt. "Identify the fleet composition," he ordered, already imagining the profit margins from selling 60 military vessels on the black market. His sensor operator's exoskeleton shifted nervously as data flowed across his screens. "Sir, the ship configurations don't match any known civilian rescue fleets. These appear to be military-grade dreadnoughts, heavy battleships, fleet carriers. This is a war fleet, not a rescue operation." The laughter started small, a chuckle from Vextar that spread through the cum channels to his other captains. 15 heavily armed raiders, each one a masterpiece of predatory engineering against 60 ships from some unknown species? The Deathworlders, whoever they were, had finally lost their minds. They brought a war fleet to rescue a single research vessel. Vextar's laughter grew louder, echoing through the bridge. "These aliens have more courage than sense." Spread. "Formation, let's give them a proper welcome to pirate space." But then his sensor operator's voice cut through the laughter like a blade through silk. "Sir, I'm detecting massive energy buildups across their entire fleet. Whatever weapons they're charging, the power output is, it's off our scales." Vextar was about to respond with another joke when the first salvo arrived. The universe taught him why some species earned reputations that transcended mere legend. The human weapons didn't just attack. They rewrote the fundamental laws of what space combat was supposed to look like. Kinetic railguns fired projectiles at 17% of light speed, turning Newton's laws into weapons of mass destruction. These weren't bullets. They were relativistic hammers that punched through shields designed to stop conventional energy weapons like they were made of crystallized air. The first pirate ship, the Blood Prophet, simply ceased to exist. One moment it was a kilometer-long predator bristling with weapons and armor plating. The next moment it was an expanding cloud of superheated particles that briefly outshone the nearby star. Evasive maneuvers. Vextar screamed, but his words were lost in the chaos of an engagement that was redefining everything the galaxy thought it knew about warfare. Fusion torpedoes. Weapons that turned matter directly into energy began detonating among the pirate formation like miniature suns. Each explosion released enough energy to power a small planet for a year, and the humans were firing them in volleys of dozens. Armored hulls that had withstood decades of combat simply vaporized under the assault, their molecular bonds unable to maintain coherence under such thermal stress. But it was the laser arrays that truly showcased humanity's approach to problem solving. These weren't the focused energy beams that most species use for precision strikes. These were coherent light weapons that carved through ship hulls like burning knives through butter. Their targeting systems so advanced that they could simultaneously track and engage multiple targets while compensating for relativistic effects and gravitational distortion. Return fire. Return fire, X-Star commanded. But his weapons officer was staring at his displays in horror. Sir, our targeting computers can't lock onto them. They're moving in formations that shouldn't be possible. Their ships are coordinating fire control across the entire fleet like they're all part of a single organism. The human fleet moved through the pirate formation like a plague of mechanical locusts, their tactics displaying the kind of coordination that spoke of a species that turned warfare into an art form. They didn't just shoot at targets, they anticipated where their enemies would try to escape and placed killing shots there first. They used the nebula's gravitational fields not as obstacles but as weapons, bending the paths of their projectiles to strike from impossible angles. Captain Vexstar watched his carefully constructed pirate empire dissolve into expanding plasma. Cloudson realized with growing horror that he wasn't facing a rescue fleet at all. He was facing something that his species' most terrifying legends had only hinted at, a military force that treated the complete annihilation of 15 heavily armed warships as a routine Tuesday afternoon. Distress call, screamed to his communications officer. Send out warnings to all Krolex bases. Tell them his words were cut off as a human kinetic round, traveling at 60,000 kilometers per second, turned his ship's communication array into a brief, brilliant star. In fact, every pirate vessel that tried to transmit distress signals found their communication systems targeted with surgical precision. In the first 30 seconds of the engagement, the humans, it seemed, didn't want word of this encounter getting out, at least not from the pirate side. The engagement lasted exactly 11 minutes and 37 seconds, not because the humans needed that long to win, but because that's how long it took their targeting computers to process and eliminate every single target in the combat zone. Not a single pirate ship escaped. Not one distress call made it past the human jamming systems. 15 vessels that had terrorized shipping lanes across 3 sectors simply ceased to exist. Their destruction so complete that forensic investigators would later need quantum-level sensors just to confirm they had ever been there. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the Retribution's edge, watching debris fields cool in the vacuum of space where moments before there had been ships full of beings who had made the fatal mistake of murdering innocents. Behind him, Captain Thelanara stared through the viewports with an expression of awe and primal terror that would haunt her dreams for the rest of her very long life. "Your people call us Deathworlders," Morrison said quietly, his voice carrying across the silent bridge with the weight of absolute truth. "Do you think we're monsters because we evolved on a world that tried to kill us every day for millions of years? Predators, parasites, diseases, natural disasters, climate changes that could wipe out entire civilization's Earth, threw everything it had at us for eons." "Dada." He turned to face the alien captain, and she saw in his eyes something that transcended mere human emotion. This was the gaze of a species that had looked into the abyss of extinction and chosen to climb out stronger. "But you misunderstand what that made us. We didn't become killers despite our world's cruelty. We became protectors because of it. Every generation that survived did so by protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. When innocents call for help, we answer. When predators threaten the defenseless, we don't just defeat them. We erase them from existence so completely that other predators have nightmares about what happened here." As the human fleet prepared to escort the Veilani survivors safely home, emergency broadcasts began spreading across the galaxy through quantum communication networks. deep space monitoring stations, and the whispered conversations of traders who dealt in information. The message was crystal clear and would be repeated in 1,000 languages across 1,000,000 worlds. Attack the innocent. The humans will find you. They will judge you. And they will end you so thoroughly that even your atoms will forget they were ever part of something evil. The galaxy's criminals, slavers, and predator species received that message and quietly began reevaluating their career choices. Distress beacons, once seen as opportunities for easy prey, suddenly became things that sane beings avoided, like radioactive plague zones. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, other species that had built their civilizations on the suffering of the weak heard the message and decided that maybe, just maybe, it was time to find easier prey. After all, there were some nightmares that even monsters feared. And humanity had just announced to the universe that they were the thing that nightmares had nightmares about. Captain, Thelanara would return to her home world with a story that would reshape galactic diplomacy forever. But she would also return with a simple, terrifying truth that would echo through the corridors of power across known space. The quarantine around Earth wasn't meant to protect the galaxy from humanity. It was meant to protect humanity from having to do what they'd just done on a galactic scale. The end.